going on, everyone? Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Welcome, everyone, to another stream over here at Level Effect. Welcome, everyone. We've got a special guest here today, Neil. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for being here this Friday with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Get my chat window up. I'm ready to rock.
Yeah, good stuff. Cool. Looks like we've got a decent sized crew over here kicking things off.
Sweet.
Kumo's here. Nice. As long as Kumo's here, we're in good shape. Karina, welcome back as well, too. Patricia's in the house as well. I saw a little bit up as well. Jordan's here. Nice. Frankie, Zumat, Amaduba. That's a new chatter over here. Cool. Getting some of the crew rolling in. Got an exciting stream today. Looking forward to this one.
We'll see how we do it keeping the cats out of the room. They're not thrilled I've shut the door.
Well, Fleetus last week actually had some guest appearance actors on his stream as well too. So it might be a thing that we have more than just one instructor.
Yeah,
a feline instructor this time with us this Friday.
We'll see. So I've shut the door, but it doesn't shut all the way. And usually they just get antsy that the door is shut and they don't have access to whatever's on the other side.
Yeah. Nice. We'll see if they make an appearance or not. But
we'll find out if I have to go leave to open a door for them or not. But anyway.
Yeah. Cool. Well, welcome again, everyone, to another Friday over here, Level Effect. So we have a guest instructor, a SOC 100 instructor, not just any guest instructor, someone that's working on the content as well, too. We actually have ourselves here today, Neil Desai. Welcome, Neil, to our stream. And so Neil's got a ton of experience, 25 years in the field, primarily on engineering infrastructure side of things. We're talking about experience. So he's been a principal consultant over at Hewlett Packard, solutions architect right after that with Micro Focus. And then he was at Elastic for almost 7 years. And he was a senior principal solutions architect. And finally now on to Greylog as the principal security strategist. So talk about a ton of experience, infrastructure knowledge that is well beyond my level for sure. I'm going to learn a ton this stream. So I'm happy to have you here with us, Neil. And I think the students are going to be having a good time with you too. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So looking forward to it. It's going to be good.
Yeah, definitely. For everyone's in the chat right now, feel free to go ahead and you can shoot some questions over as we go. This is the little pre-show room, so kind of just share whatever you want over here. Tell us what you're drinking. Apparently, we got fizzy water. We have soda, depending, La Croix, or if that's how you pronounce it. It's terrible. I should be able to say that. As a friend.
Actually YouTube videos talking about how you're supposed to properly pronounce it. So obviously it is not a set thing.
Yeah.
And Jordan, I'm going to try and make this worth you having to take away 2 hours from your SOC 100 networking. That is my goal. Is that when you go through, you're like, you know what? That was well worth the timeout.
I think it's going to be very well worth it. Absolutely. Cool. Let's see. So yeah, we got some more students rolling in as well too, just crossing the 20 mark. So good stuff. So like I said, feel free inside of chat, drop your questions, comments as you go. We're gonna move the screen over in a second over here to the live sharing screen, and Neil's got a whole presentation, a whole walkthrough of awesome stuff, including live demonstrations. As I saw. So we're actually going to have him SSH into his setup. He's actually going to walk you through some of these things. This isn't just like a PowerPoint. He's actually going to have a live interactive demo he can show with you. So very exciting. Sweet. Okay, Neil, you ready?
Yep, as ready as I'm going to get.
Good to go? Okay, cool. Let's switch over to the other screen over here.
All righty.
So everyone should see the presentation window right now. Let us know if you don't, but you should.
I see it on my Twitch screen, so I think we're good.
I think we're good. Awesome. Yep, Kumo's got it over there. Right. Neil, all yours, man.
All right.
lead
Well, thank you
away.
so much. Thank you so much. So, thank you everyone for joining us here on this Friday. Thank you for giving me 2 hours of your precious time for some of you taken away from your networking class, but I'm going to try and make it up to you to make sure it's worth it. So, today we're going to be talking about home labs, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And usually instructors will start off with a, who am I type thing. But here, let's be honest, who I am absolutely does not matter. It's more about where I've been, right? What have I done? Kind of what have I seen? And so for me, I've been building home labs before it was cool, or just kind of a funny thing. But in reality, right, been in it for 25 years. Home labs was just kind of this thing. And we didn't call it home labs. It was more of a learning environment. My first real lab actually was at my first job doing security, but my lab was so big, I was actually asked to sit in the data center to work because when I put that lab out on the floor, it was just too noisy and too hot for people. And they complained all the time. Back then, before VMs and all that, used to swap out hard drives for different operating systems. You're like, Neil, you probably could have dual booted. I'm like, yeah, I just wasn't that comfortable with it at the time. So for me, it was just easier to have a different OS on different hard drives, just kind of swap them out on my desktop or laptop. And then VMware Workstation came out. And for me, that was huge for learning because it allowed me to do things I couldn't do before. And then we're going to talk about snapshots. But when that feature came out, for me, again, huge game changer. But what I've seen over time, right, is technology has changed so much and no one, says anything about that. But the thing is, we all get caught in this kind of old state of mind as far as what is a home lab and what is it supposed to do and what are we supposed to build and hardware specs and all that. And let's see if we can think differently here. And the big thing is learn from my mistakes. I've already made them, so you don't have to. So when we think about home labs, right, you probably got on Reddit. They have a whole channel there for home labs, and you'll see all sorts of screens like this one here, right? Someone spent a decent amount of money. They've got some Dell servers. It's got some nice LED lights in there. And some of you are probably drooling right now looking at this going, yes, that is what I want. That is what I want to build, right? Or maybe you see someone else's lab, maybe not as nice or fantastic, but again, nice lab. You got some servers, we got some networking gear, we got a central monitor up top, we got a lot of drive space down at the bottom there. Again, everyone is going, yes, this is why I'm here because Neil is going to tell me how to build that. Right? Last awesome lab here again, right? Just having different variations. And this is usually what we think of. And unfortunately, right, when we're coming into cybersecurity or even IT, this is what we conjure up in our mind of what we're going to build, what we're going to work with. And we kind of set this bar for our um, technology stack as far as we're going to work with. But in reality, this is also a lab. So this is actually a Raspberry Pi setup with a whole bunch of Raspberry Pis in there. I couldn't count them all, but that person has to have over a dozen Raspberry Pis in there. Now, does it mean it's equal to the other labs? Absolutely not. But again, one of the reasons that everyone's lab is different is everything serves a little bit different purpose, right? So we're going to learn what questions to ask and how to think about it before we just go buying things. Some of you also might be into, having nice cabling, right? This is another reason people like home labs because they see all this nice cabling and their OCD drives wild and like, oh, I can't wait to run cables like this and make it look beautiful and just perfect and go crazy doing that kind of stuff. Or, even here, maybe not nice as beautiful, but having the different colors. And there's so many different reasons people get into home labs. It's just kind of crazy over here, right? And you're probably going, oh yeah, just take my money. I want those labs. I want that networking equipment. Just how do I get there, Neil? Tell me so I could just do it. Hold on for just a second here, right? Because when you're laying there at night, right, you don't have anything bought yet. You can't get to sleep. You've done your level of act homework. You're super psyched about what you've just learned. This is what you're dreaming about for your home lab, right? Oh, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to have racks of equipment. There's going to be servers and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, when you wake up in the morning, you'll look at your bank account and this is more what your home lab is going to look like, unfortunately, right? And this is the problem, right? Yes, it does serve a purpose. It's probably not the most elegant, but it kind of does what it's supposed to do there. Now you're probably wondering, what is this and why do I have it here? Hold on. This is a thing called sunlight. This is a thing called the outside. And bear with me for one more slide. This is one of my cats, Khaleesi. I have 5 cats. You're like, well, why did you include a picture of sunlight and cats? Easy. You need to have a life outside of your work and outside of your lab. If you do things incorrectly, you could spend so much time in your lab that you actually lose track of the outside world. If you think I'm joking, I'm not. I had this happen to me a few years ago. I was going to a workout and it was about freezing outside. So if you're Fahrenheit, that's about 32 degrees. If you're Celsius, that's 0 degrees. And we were doing workouts inside the gym. And then we had a choice. Do we either want to get on the bike and do so many meters on the bike, or do we want to go outside in the cold and just run for 400 meters, come back into the warm gym and do more workout? I was, I think, the only person that chose to go outside and run. And the gym instructor's like, Neil, why are you running outside? Like, you're the only person. It's freezing. And I'm like, well, Zach, I just realized I have not seen daylight in 4 days. I'd counted back the last time I left my house, my office area, and it had been 4 days because I was so consumed with work and my lab. And then other than that, it was eating and sleeping. I really didn't see anything. And that's not the way you want to live. You don't want to get consumed with that. So again, that's one of the reasons that we kind of want to learn what to do. So the big question you got to ask yourself, do you want to work in your lab or do you want to work on your lab? So I'm looking at the comments over here. Tell me what you think I mean by this, right? Give me some ideas of what you think I mean by in your lab or on your lab.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big question. I'd love to hear some of the chat's comments on this.
This really drives everything.
It does.
Um,
Yeah. I think we've all been there as well too, Neil, in your story of we lose track of time and daylight, forget to shower, walk out,
yeah.
like what the hell just happened? Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
what year is it, right? I'm going outside. Did an apocalypse happen? What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not ill intent, right? But we have to realize there's more to life than just your work in your lab.
Couple comments over there for you, Neil.
Yeah. So we got productivity or satisfy a building something. Close, close. Let's get a couple more responses here, please. Come on, people. Be interactive. Ask questions. I know there's other people lurking. And I know
I can
people have
see
asked me
the
on
numbers.
SOC 100 about things. So I know there's questions to be asked.
Karina's saying there right above Jordan, saying, so you want your
Yep.
lab to be useful toward achieving
Yeah.
your goals.
Exactly. Exactly. Ooh, Bearded Ruckus finally showing up. Thank you, my man. All
Yeah.
right. So at the end of the day, right? If I work in my lab, it means my lab, kind of like Karina said, it's being useful for what I need to do, right? I can go in there, I can accomplish my tasks, my goals, I can be successful, and I can move on with life. When I work on my lab, it means I get to my lab, but before I get to do anything useful, guess what I got to do? I got to run an update. Up, network cable broke. Up, network config broke. Up, update broke something and I don't know what. Let me go to my backup. Oh, junk. My backup doesn't work because it's a different format. That is working on your lab, where you spend more time being a sysadmin to your lab than actually getting to use the lab for the whole thing you intended it for. And here's usually how things go, right? You buy your lab, you get it up, you get it set up. You're super psyched. You're like a kid on Christmas. You start, installing everything. You're so happy. You get everything configured. It all looks perfect. And then that one update happens that messes something up. And all of a sudden, you never want to touch your lab again because things are so broken. Things don't work like you want, all these different things. So we want to make sure, right? We think about home labs more of a, what should my learning environment be here? We want to make sure that we're doing everything right. So with that, right, when we look at home labs, the first thing we're going to have to buy is our hardware, right? Usually this is going to be a server, workstation. We'll get into the specs a little bit that later. But then we also have to buy the networking cables. And this is the part that people usually love to do, right? They like to build their software. I don't know, maybe it's technical people. I don't know. Has anyone there figured out why you want to buy a server? But anyway, people want to buy servers and networking gear. And then depending on what you're doing, you may have to buy some licenses for software, whether it's for operating system software, virtualization software, whatever, to kind of help make things run. And all of this costs money. And no one here disagrees with, they understood this about it, right? And great. This is my one-time sunk cost. Here's the ugly truth about labs, though, is all of this will generate a significant amount of heat. Now, granted, it does depend on what you're building to how much heat's generated. For just your purposes, just off to the side here, I have 3 Dell R710s that sit there and they get quite toasty. I have an HP Z620, gets quite toasty and some other stuff. It gets toasty enough that in a winter time, my wife comes into my office, lays on my couch, and if it's not warm enough, she'll ask me, are all my servers on? Because she understands when my server's on, it makes the room toasty enough for her to feel comfortable and get a great nap in, right? That is a significant amount of heat. Unfortunately, in the summertime, you don't want that heat. So what do? You crank down your air conditioning, right? So now you're combating your heat with your air conditioning. And so you're trying to cool down the room that has the servers. But unfortunately, the rest of your house, apartment, condo, whatever, is now suffering with sub-zero temperatures because, well, you have to deal with, right? Just dealing with that server room there. And all of this, guess what? Jumps up your electricity costs, right? Whether it's powering on everything, running the AC. I had a friend in Florida who had a lab a little bit bigger than mine, and he's the reason I bought my home lab. Again, don't make my mistake. Just because someone else bought it, you don't need the same thing. Lives out in Florida. He actually had to move his lab into a specific room, had to buy a AC unit just for that room. And his electric bill a month jumped over $200 just for running his lab 24/7, just to have the servers powered on, not even if they were doing anything. So that is a significant thing to think about, right? And again, all of that, plus you also have the noise. When these things start up, it could get fairly loud. My cats don't like it. They will just run away because it just sounds too loud. And the problem with the below the line stuff is those are monthly reoccurring costs, right? This is the part that people don't think about. People usually accept the above the line, those one-time sunk costs, but depending on what you pick up top can have a significant impact on what your bottom below the line kind of looks like as far as what you're going to be paying. So think about those things as you're, going to be building out your labs. So one thing we need to realize, right? There's no such thing as a one size fits all setup or configuration. And I know a lot of people have asked kind of about that, right? Like, hey, how much RAM do I need? How much CPU do I need? How much disk space do I need? Or, hey, can someone check out this link to this hardware setup? Would this be good for a home lab? And those are all great questions. But the problem is you're trying to solve something that you don't really have the understanding of what you're trying to solve for yet. So we're going to take it back a little bit before we figure that out. The other thing is we want to make sure we keep to our budget. This is just an old person advice, right? Just if you don't have it, don't spend it. Don't get into debt over this. I am huge over not being into debt just because debt can run your life. I know it's not part of our thing here, but just good general knowledge for life. Don't get to debt to where it controls how you can live. Make sure the lab is built to suit your learning needs, right? Again, this is something that Karina talked about. It's like, hey, what do I actually need to learn? And the thing is, right, as you go through these, you're starting out new, your learning needs are going to change over time. So guess what? Your lab may change over time, and that is okay. You didn't make a mistake if you go through the process properly because you build to what you need. So depending on what you have, right? I could use a virtual machine. A lot of you probably have done this, but this is probably going to be a single box. I'm going to need some CPU, RAM, and disk to run this. VMware Workstation is a great choice. It is my preferred choice, especially now that it's free. Love to use that. To me, it has some better networking options than VirtualBox. And then, or you can use Microsoft Hyper-V, but you might run into some limitations there. So if you're asking me my preference, that's going to be VMware Workstation. Or if you have a big enough server, right, you can use VMware vSphere or Proxmox. So the problem that I found with vSphere is when you're buying these servers on eBay, they're already old, right? A company has used them in a data center, has depreciated them over the 3 or 5 life year span. So by the time you're getting your quote unquote new server, it's probably already, 3 to 5 years old. And VMware may not work on it because they keep updating the minimum hardware specs. And that's what I ran into when I bought mine. I only got to use vSphere in my lab for a couple of years before all of a sudden ESXi just would not install because I didn't meet the minimum requirements. Like, well, I could have hacked things and done all sorts of weird stuff to get it work. But again, the weirder I make my lab, the harder it is to maintain that configuration. And I don't want to do that from experience. And your next choice is using Proxmox, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later here. Mistakes to avoid, right? Don't keep up with the Joneses. This is a saying. I don't know if it's an American saying, but hey, you know, Don't worry about what others post on the internet in their home labs. That's the trap I fell into, right? My friend built this really cool lab, and I'm like, oh man, I'm seeing what he's learning, and I get so psyched. And I went and I built something very similar to his. His lab and my lab do roughly the same thing now. They sit and they collect dust. Recently, a project came out. We'll talk about it. Ludus that has kind of revived my lab. But yeah, don't go spending a whole bunch of money on it. And do not spend a lot of money, especially when you're starting out, because you don't know exactly what you're doing or what you want. So don't go crazy. It's no different than building a home gym or building anything else. It's don't go crazy. Being a part-time sysadmin is where you kind of want to stay away from again. And so we're going to talk about our different options. And that goes back to the, do you want to work in the lab or do you want to work on your lab? So some of you go, well, if I don't have a lot of money to spend and I don't want to go into debt, well, let me just work on my actual workstation now. It's like, well, your personal day-to-day system might be okay for learning, right? But we have to understand that sometimes if we're doing something and it breaks, does that brick our actual day-to-day system? And we probably don't want that, right? It's our day-to-day system. It kind of just needs to work and do what we need to. But there are certain times we can use our day-to-day system as a quote unquote home lab. If we think about home lab as just more a learning environment, and we'll actually go through a few scenarios where it's actually a great option to use. And don't spend money on hardware you don't need. I know it sounds redundant. I've kind of talked about it there, but treat it like a business, right? Justify the cost with a valid reason based on facts, hopefully, of what you need and why you need it. Because here's the trip that most technical people will fall into. Oh, that looks cool. Man, that looks really cool. You know what? I think a 20 terabyte NVMe RAID 10 is exactly what I need to learn scripting. Right? You're like, oh, no, 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 no. That is not the thing. Yeah, someone just put it. It's eye candy. No, no, no.
Mhm.
Make sure you have a valid reason, right? Understand what are you going to spend and what are you going to get out of it here. So this is something that was hard for me, right? I just bought all this lab equipment. I was all in on labs and going, yeah, man, I got this thing. And then I go to Elastic and they're very different, right? It's the first time I worked for a company that actually had no data center. They were pretty much cloud everything. And I'm like, hey, boss, can I get some licenses to do workstation? Like, Neil, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? What am I doing? I'm building a lab. Like, Neil, we use AWS here. All of our people have free access to shared AWS resources. You can build all you want in AWS for free, and the company pays for it. I'm like, but, and it was hard for me to get over because I was so used to having something that I could see in my lab and for some reason use it. It took me a while to understand, man, cloud providers are great for a lot of the things that they do. If you don't use one yet, just about every cloud provider has a free something or other for first time users. Usually for like a year, they'll give you certain things free. Now, remember, free does come at a little bit of a cost. We won't talk about that. One of the things that cloud providers are great at, you want to talk about getting up and running fast. We're going to go through it in AWS. We're talking minutes to have a fully functional Windows server up and running where we literally do no work. We just kind of sit there and wait for it to get built, and then we RDP into it. You also get to pay as you go. And this is what we're talking about with the free, right? Unfortunately, the free resources, I think it's like 1 gig of RAM and some hard drive space. And usually for Windows, that's a little bit too little RAM. You usually need 2 to 4 gigs. So while, yeah, you could use the free environment, you might spend a little bit more time than you like waiting for the cursor to move around or as you're typing, waiting for things to respond because it's just paging so often. So it may be worth to spend. But if you look at it, right, I think when we look at the cloud environment we're going to use, it's 6 cents an hour. 6 cents an hour is definitely not a lot of money. And especially if you turn it off when you're not using it, if you only use it for a certain amount of time, it definitely can be something that you could actually manage the cost. Where cloud gets expensive is when you turn something on and forget about it. Famous last words. Oh man, I'm just going to go to lunch real quick. I'm going to come right back to my lab. No, shut your lab down, go to lunch, because there's no guarantee when you come back from lunch, you're going right back to your lab, right? There could be so many reasons why. And the fact that it starts up so quick, again, there's no reason, even though you only save 6 cents, what happens is, hey, you're on the way home, you get a call to go out with some friends, you get a call from work about emergency, 2 weeks go by, you forgot about your lab, and all of a sudden you get a bill you didn't expect because you kind of forgot to turn it off. So right? We want to make sure that we can control that, but pay as you go is a great thing because it really keeps your costs really, really low. So I looked at some of the cloud providers, right? And see, okay, what are they offering? What do they have and kind of where do we choose? So the three main ones, at least for US centric people and probably most of the world, is Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or you might have heard it as GCP, or Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. Oracle and IBM have kind of started to get into things, but they're not really as big, at least for us. I don't see many people on them. And then some people use things like DigitalOcean or other places like that. So if you're looking at Azure, and we're going to look at here second, the problem is the Windows license is actually an additional cost. So not only are you paying for the hardware monthly and the networking in the disk, you also pay for a license. GCP, same thing. You have to pay for that license, and that like, okay, well, it would be nice if it was just kind of included, and it's included. But if you look at the actual details of your bill, you'll see you do get charged separately for it. And this is what I love about AWS is like, hey, it's included and it's cheap. I'm like, hey, I like that, right? Make my life easy, make it cheap. When I look at Oracle and IBM, 24 cents an hour, 20 cents an hour, they run significantly more than my 6 cents an hour, right? So you're talking at least 6 times the cost, 5 times the cost of what I'm currently doing. Not worth it for me. And then DigitalOcean, they don't have Windows available, right? So a lot of places you got to see, do they have an environment that I can use? A lot of places will have Linux available for them, right, to do things, but they may not have Windows, licensing issues, what have you there. So this is Google Cloud. And so you can see off to the left here, right? I'm getting to choose my operating system, a Windows Server 2022 data center. But if you look at the right, I'm paying $63.04 an hour. That comes down to about 9 cents an hour. For hardware, I get 2 virtual CPUs and 4 gigs of memory. I also get a premium image usage fee. That is your licensing fee for Windows. That is almost $35 a month. And I get 50 gigs for $5. So my total is $63.04, right? And again, this is on the cheaper end of things, but we can get much cheaper with AWS. But this is what we start looking at some of the costs when it comes to cloud. This is, I believe, Oracle's. Look at that top cost up in green, the top right part of the screen, $182.81. What? For the same thing, 2 gigs of or 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory. Where does all that cost come in? Look at the very bottom, compute OS images, $136.90 to run Windows, right? They're definitely not getting a discount. That is almost the cost of a Windows 11 license, right? You run that for a couple of months. You could have just bought your license outright from Microsoft at that point, right? So it's like, okay, are you really saving anything when you do this? Here's IBM's cloud, right? Same thing. Look all the way at the bottom, $147. Now, it's interesting. Look at how some of the costs are hidden, right? So I get 2 CPUs. With them, the smallest I could get was 8 gigs of RAM. Fine. I get a little bit more hard drive space at 75 gigs, and it's about 10, 11 cents an hour. But where they get me is the image, right? They're charging me per hour 9 cents an hour. Now, it does look cheaper than what Oracle had, and it is a little bit, but at the end of the day, $150 versus what was it before? $182. It's still more than I feel like paying personally for that. And so, any questions before we go into showtime here? Yeah. Blueberry Frankie. Yikes. Exactly. Geez. Yeah. These are the cloud costs, right? And this is where it can get expensive is if you just go to something and you don't understand, okay, who's offering what and what do I get for what they're doing? The other thing we want to think about is, right, cost is one of it, but also how hard is it to manage? Because at the end of the day, if our cloud environment kind of looks like a home lab environment and we have to spend a lot of time in the cloud getting things up and running and understanding what's where and deleting things and all that, life can get very, very, very crazy. And all of a sudden, the benefits of cloud have been just kind of thrown out the window because, well, it's just a nightmare. So let's not do that. So here I am. This is my Azure portal over here. Right. So I will create a virtual machine. I'll create an Azure virtual machine. Right. It comes up with my subscription. We'll create a new resource group. We'll call it level effect Now, I'm not going to create anything yet because I want you to look at the price. So right now, I'm sitting at $75.36 a month, and I haven't really done anything yet, right? So let's see, does this change anything? So let's say, hey, I don't need restructure infrastructure redundancy. Uh, Really hasn't changed my price at all. I'm using a Ubuntu server over here. If I change this to Windows. Now I can choose client versions of Windows, which is interesting because most other providers, I think every other provider only allows you to pick server operating systems. But let's be real, if you're working in a lab, there's no real difference in using a client operating system like Windows 10 or Windows 11 versus Windows Server 2016, 19, or 22, and just treating it as a desktop and not worrying about what operating system is it really, because at the end of the day, it's going to serve the functionality that we need. Now, if there's specific reasons why you need a client operating system, a little bit different, but let's try and keep everything fairly similar here. So notice my price jumped up to $156 just because I changed my operating system. This is Microsoft. They own the license. Why are they charging me extra? I don't know. But again, just understand that, right? And we flip over. Now we're going to go over, this is GCP. Very similar, right? I'm going to go ahead and create my VM. You get to kind of pick where it is. We'll go more into this in detail when we start doing things in AWS. I'm going to pick a low cost day-to-day computing. We can see I get my 2 CPUs and 4 gigs of memory. I only get 10 gigs here. But let's go ahead and change my thing here. We'll change. So notice I'm at $25 a month. Like I can afford that. No problem. I'm glad you can afford $25 a month, but let's change this to there. Now we've jumped up to 63, right? So our licensing fee for the operating system is actually more than we're paying for the hardware. And again, these are per month costs that you're having to pay. This is the frustrating part, right? And then finally, we're going to come over here. This is where we're actually going to build something. And this is AWS. So I'm going to go a little bit into AWS just so when you start building things, you don't make certain mistakes here. So one of the things we want to understand is what they call is a region. A region is a different part of the world where they allow you to have your environment set up. So by default, you'll have certain things, again, based on where you live and where you're logged on. You can change them. You could do different things. And the price may also change based on where you install stuff. So generally try and keep things as local to you as possible. So mine is in Ohio because of where I live. The thing you have to remember is, right, if I start building stuff and I forget where I'm building it, you can have stuff running for long periods of time that you never use, running up your bill, and you get a bill going, what happened? I don't know. And realize, oh, so every now and this can change for some odd reason on you. So just make sure when you log in that you're in the region that you want to be in when you start building everything, and build everything in the same region. So now if I click on instances over here or wherever, I have no instances built. So we're going to go ahead and build one. We'll launch instance. We'll call this, if I can spell today, level effect. Cool. We'll scroll down. I'm going to pick Windows. And then I'm going to pick, let's see, what do I pick here? I'm going to pick 2022 base. Notice that free tier eligible. Now, here's the hardware type. Now, notice this is the free tier. So I'm only getting 1 CPU and 1 gig of memory for free. This is not going to help me. So for me, I'm going to pick something that has 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory. And if you look down here, my Windows licensing is 6 cents an hour. It's actually more expensive to use RHEL than it is Windows here. Now, before we go any further, they make things fairly secure to try and get in, right? So key pairs is something you may not be used to, but if you're in AWS, you need to have one, even if you're using Windows, and we're going to see why. So I don't have a key pair right now. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new key pair. Create key pair. Good. I'm done. It's been saved. Now, here we keep everything the same. I don't need to change anything, but notice automatically it's going to say, hey, because it's Windows, I know you need RDP. I'm going to let anywhere RDP into. Now, how many of you think that's a great idea to let anyone in the world have RDP access to your lab? Anyone love that idea? Probably not. Anyone here have skin on the back of their head start to creep in when you look at this? Anyone start getting sick when they think about anyone in the internet RDPing into their system? Hopefully, some of you, you're learning things, right? So I'm going to change this to my IP address. So what this means now is it is changing the firewall rule so only I can get to it. Now, this is great for a lot of things as long as I stay here. The minute I go to a coffee shop, the minute I go travel to an Airbnb or a hotel or a conference room, or I go outside and I bounce off my Wi-Fi, right? My phone Wi-Fi. The problem is my IP address is going to change. And guess what? I'm not going to be able to get back into my system. So we're going to show you also how to get back into it should your IP address change. But for right now, we're going to keep it right here. Your IP address, 30 gigs, everything's really good. And then I click launch instance. And now I sit here and I just twiddle my thumbs for a little bit waiting because I'm just waiting for it to install. So it says, hey, I successfully launched. So I'll click on that. It says it's running already. Really cool. Now, it's not lying, but it's not also totally truthful because for Windows, it does have some automation going on in the back end to create our first user account with a very secure password. So we can't log in just yet, but it is technically running. We'll notice if we go to connect and I go to RDP client, has me my username. If I go get password, it's like, nah, you can't do that. So while we're waiting for this, we're going to go look at how do I change things, right? So if I go back here, so if I scroll down to security and I see I've got these security groups, if I click on this security group, it says, here are my rules. So I can edit my inbound rules, right? And remember, this has my current IP. I can exit out from here. I can, again, choose my IP. So you don't have to even know your IP. They're smart enough to figure out what your IP is and you're good to go. Because I haven't changed anything, it's going to get mad that I haven't changed anything. So that's okay. So I'm not going to worry about that. So we're just going back to my instance over here and seeing, is it ready for me to connect to yet? Awesome. So remember that SSH key that we created earlier that normally like, well, I only need that if I'm on Windows. Well, you actually need it here because this is how we are decrypting our file. So boom. Now, decrypt password. Don't worry, I will be deleting all of this shortly after. So anyone thinking about logging into my system, you're probably not going to be able to do it very well. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my client here for this. I have to bring up this one. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new session here. And it's going to be an RDP session. And I'm going to have a username of administrator for my remote host. I need to go back here and get this address. Now, the other thing you need to remember is that if you shut this down for long enough, there might be a chance that it goes and gets a new IP address. So we need to make sure that we get the right IP address. Let me cancel it. I forgot to get my password again. Let me. And now I'm able to log into the administrator account on this box. So if you look at it, minus my mess ups of getting a password and all of that, it is significantly faster to go ahead and have your cloud environment kind of set things up for you and get things running than it is for you to go and download the ISO, walk through all the things, do all the reboots, spend, 15, 20, 30 minutes trying to get it up and running to get to the same point that I am now. And so again, we're already good here to go. So are there any questions about this? Again, this is what I love about the cloud is it's very quick for me to get this set up, very quick for me to start working in here and running. I don't have to spend forever getting there. Now, something else to kind of think about that not everyone does. Let me see if I have the options here.
We also have a question too from Karina over there in chat, Neil. Just confirming the cloud provider is charged by the hour here, not by the month. She's asking.
Correct. And usually it's actually not even by the hour. Sometimes it's by the second. So it isn't always to the hour. They're usually really good about how they charge, and it's more in the benefit of the user than it is the cloud provider. So yeah, the only time you're going to get charged either by the month or years if you sign a contract stating that you want to use something. And none of us are going to use enough to benefit from a deep discount of signing a 1 year or 3 year commitment with any person, right? So yeah, just go with the standard thing and you get charged like per second, 10 seconds. It's something very small, but definitely makes it affordable here. So they don't have it on here. Um, so if you're using the Microsoft RDP client, there is a way to change it to either do 32-bit, 24-bit, 16-bit, or 15-bit. If you're in an environment where bandwidth is extremely crucial and you can't afford to waste anything because you don't have super fast internet, you definitely want to change it. So by default, it's probably going to do a decent resolution, but that eats a lot more bandwidth. If you change it down to 16-bit, it may look ugly, but again, a lab isn't about beauty, it's about functionality. And so we may want to switch to that just so we can have a faster experience at kind of getting through things that would be going. So, Jordan, would metered services be available to this local use? Um, so when you talk about metered, I'm assuming you're talking about how they charge for things. So yeah, how they charge is going to be the same for everything. I don't understand what you mean exactly by metered services because they all kind of meter your usage and charge you based on what you use, right? So if you use it more heavily, it'll probably get a little bit heavier charge. But most of what we do doesn't fall in there because we're not spiking the CPU and things like that on there. But yeah, it's pretty much pay per use, right? You stand it up, you use it, you're done. When you're done using it, right? So here I'm done using it. I close out. I go back to my instances. I look at this. I go terminate, delete. I confirm my delete. That's it. So I'm only getting charged for that little bit of time that it was up and running. I'm not getting charged for the entire hour. All right. You can go look at your billing over here and kind of see how much you're getting charged to understand your costs. But again, it's really, really friendly in my opinion. And it's aimed definitely, in the more for the consumer side than it is for the AWS side as far as the money. They know they're really making their money on the big companies who are using it heavily and who have things that stay on 24/7, 365 that use a lot of workloads. That's where it's at. Since we're not doing that, we don't need to worry about that. All right. Are we all good to go? Everything not frozen now?
I think we're good. Yeah, it looks like chat for some reason on the video feed just kind of froze for a second, but it's back to normal now.
Cool. One thing we also want to be thinking about, there's this concept called a DTS charge. It's a data transfer service charge. Cloud providers do not mind you bringing data into them, right? You can download all the data you want from the internet into your cloud instance. However, the minute data starts flowing around their environment, they start charging you. Now, the way it works is if the data is local, which is what we're doing, the charge is the least amount. So, right, if you have two systems out there that are talking to each other, you're getting charged very little. The minute you go to a different availability zone, right? So we talked about this. These are regions. Within each region, there's an availability zone, right? So an availability zone is another physical location within that region, that allows for redundancy. So what we're doing, we don't need redundancy. So we can keep everything in the same availability zone to help lower costs. The most expensive cost for DTS charges when data leaves that provider to go out to the internet or anywhere else. Essentially, if it touches a public IP address from your instance, you get charged the most amount of money, right? So what you don't want to do is, hey, I'm going to download a gigantic tar file, zip file, or something like that to my instance, and then I'm going to download it to my house later on. you're going to pay a ton of money when you download it to yourself. The other weird thing is, let's say you have an AWS instance, your friend has an AWS instance, and you're trying to share data between the two. Technically, because you went from yours to theirs and it crossed the internet using a public IP address, you're also going to get charged that most expensive DTS cost, because as far as they're concerned, it did technically go out to the internet. So just kind of be aware of your DTS cost, because a lot of people don't think about it, and it can easily rank up to be a third of your bill, depending on what you're doing, and sometimes even more, just depending how much data you're transferring around. So just kind of be really, really conscious of that. But I think for most of the things that we're going to be doing, it's not going to be a big deal. I put it out there just so you don't get caught off guard when you do something really, really weird with it. So are there any questions around this so far? All right, so we've seen how easy it is to build a lab. We've done all of that.
Yeah, it seems always a little complex at first. There's a lot of things to click on, a lot of configurations to choose.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think once you just see someone do it, it's like, oh, it wasn't that bad,
Yeah.
really. Yeah,
And for me, AWS was just the simplest. When I look at some of the
yeah,
stuff I had to do in GCP or Azure, I'm like, maybe if you get used to it enough, it doesn't feel as bad. But I felt like AWS is just super simple,
yeah.
one screen, go through, done, and it's over with.
Agreed.
All right. So now that we got done with that, let's go into some on-prem, right? So when I talked about my old systems I didn't want to touch anymore, right? This particular project, I know it says .cloud. It is not a cloud product. It's not something on the internet. It is on the internet, and the fact you can download it, right? But this is how you could automate your home lab. And so on the left is a configuration file that describes the lab, right? Again, you're not building it manually. You're describing what should it look like? What are some of the features it should have? And it takes that file and turns it into the thing on the right, right? It actually builds the lab for you. It automatically builds your machines out there. It can configure them. It gets your DNS, your IP addresses. It can install software. It could do, promote it to a domain controller and get your whole domain configured. There's a lot of things it could do automatically for you. And the reason that they created this is, here's the truth: 90% of security research is getting a test environment set up and properly configured. This is the same for any type of test environment, not just for security research. Anytime you do stuff, you're going to spend so much time getting things up and running instead of doing the thing you want to. Remember, are we working in our lab or are we working on our lab? And so this makes life easy. There's some optimizations you can do with this that take it to an incredible level. Here's a really cool thing that Eric did, right? He's running 92 VMs on a little NUC box, right? These NUC boxes are really small, almost two palm sized boxes, maybe roughly smaller, has 96 gigs of RAM in it, and it has some NVMe drives RAID 0. Now, it doesn't mean that these 92 VMs are super high performance, but just think about that. You're still running 92 VMs in a little thing. To his icon, right? That is just mind blowing. That's something you probably shouldn't want to do. But as the owner of the project, he just kind of wanted to see what he could push and, how did it operate and stuff. He's like, yeah, man, it actually worked really good like that. So this particular project has brought my personal hardware back to life after ESXi said, hey, man, your stuff's too old. You can't run anymore. So I'm super thankful for this project. It's awesome. It's really easy to install. There is a server component and a client component. It's a simple exe. You install Debian 12 vanilla. You download the server. You run the server command to install. It automatically downloads Proxmox for you, gets everything set up. You're good to go. You can install the client on the same machine, and essentially you tell the client what to do. It automatically talks to the server and does everything for you. Super, super, super easy. Their webpage has all these pre-built configurations. It makes life so nice. So when we're building our VM, here's some, or our lab environments, here's some questions that we want to think about asking, right? What am I trying to learn, right? Don't just say, well, I want to learn Active Directory. It's a really, really, really large question, right? What exactly do I want to learn in Active Directory, right? Am I trying to build an Active Directory environment where I'm going to need a forest, at least a domain controller or two, and a server? That's cool, right? But be specific. Don't just say, I want to learn Active Directory, or I want to learn networking, What does that even mean? I want to learn networking, right? There's so many different things, or I want to learn programming, right? There's just so many. Be as specific as you can to what you're trying to learn, because that's going to tailor the environment that we use to learn it. And realistically, what do I need to learn this? This is the part that people get kind of hung up on, is they start thinking about all these crazy scenarios, these what ifs. What if is probably never going to happen? And if it does, you'll figure out how to deal with it when you get there. Don't worry about what if. Build small, play around, learn, and you'll probably find out, this probably meets my needs, or hey, it's close to meeting my needs. Not exactly. I only need to bump up something a little bit, but all right, just understand what you realistically need. Do you need to have this thing up 24/7? This is one of the reasons that people have home labs, right? It's just they just want to keep it running all the time, and that's cool. But again, if it's running, it's using electricity, it's generating heat, which is then using I have to use air conditioning to cool it down, which is generating more electricity, and it's humming in the background, and I'm going to lose my hearing because it gets really loud in my room. Do I need all of that, or can I spend 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever, to go power on, wait for something to come up, run a command, and have my lab start up, right? A little bit of inconvenience, but is it worth it to kind of do all that? Beardy, we're going to do that later, man. Trust me. We're going to talk about the 500 tickets in 10 minutes, but that's a little bit different. That is about data swizzling, as I call it. I'm going to come up with a different term maybe sometime, but just how to look at alerts differently. And is there a possibility that if something goes really, really wrong, that I got to blow up the environment and start over, right? Because that's going to determine, can I use my day-to-day driver for this? Do I need a VM? Do I want a cloud? Like, how bad is bad here? And then how long is it going to take me to learn this? Yeah, RM-RF. Yeah, there's that. There's also some shell bombs out there. People are like, oh, run this really cool shell command. It turns out it's just this really crazy loop that DOSes everything. Don't want to do that for yourself. But yeah, don't do that here. And then how long is it going to take me to learn this? Now, really, how long, right? We always either overestimate the length of time or we underestimate the length of time. We need to get a little bit more realistic time and figure out, hey, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks learning this. And over 2 weeks, I can dedicate 4 hours, 3 days a week. That's fine, right? It's neither good nor bad, but having a understanding helps you understand, okay, well, if I'm only doing that, guess what? It doesn't need to be on for the 4 days I'm not working on it. And for the 3 days I am working on it, if I'm only operating for 4 hours a day, it doesn't need to be on for the 20 hours a day I'm not touching it, right? So we start thinking about this. We start going, hey, this is actually what I need to build. This is what I'm going to put together so I can make the most of what I'm doing. So think about this, right? Here's my learning environment choices. I have cloud provider. Don't care which one, you have a cloud provider. I have a dedicated hardware at home, server. That is a choice. I can have a dedicated hardware at home, laptop or workstation. So what's the difference between the two? Well, usually just hardware specs. So if I look at my laptop, I have one that has 32 gigs of RAM in it, and it is a i7. Not bad, has an NVMe drive in it. But my server, I have one that has 96 gigs of RAM in it, and I have 3 of them that have 128 gigs of RAM in it each. And all of my servers and my power workstation are dual Xeon boxes, meaning they have more horsepower to them, right? So those servers are going to be able to run significantly more things than my laptop. Virtualization software, right? I'm going to run it on my dedicated hardware, but I can also run virtualization software on my daily driver. So on every device I have, my laptops, they all have VMware Workstation on them. So I can run local VMs if I need to on there. We could also use our daily driver, whatever that is. I'm a Windows person, so yeah, I can use Windows if I need to do certain things. Or, right, WSL2. This is Windows Subsystem for Linux version 2. This is an amazing piece of technology. I love it. It gives you a realistic Linux environment in Windows without some of the weirdness that you got with Sigmin or some of those other people that try to do emulation of Linux and Windows. This does a much better job. Right. And so these are kind of be my choices. And the reason these are my choices is we're going to go through a couple of scenarios here where we're going to figure out what is the best way for me to learn something. Right. So are we ready? Any other questions before we go into having you solve things? Any questions? Going once.
Give them a second over there to think about some things might be on their mind. Yeah, I really like you hammering the point home about Focusing on outcomes and intentions as opposed to just like a general broad topic of learning and sort of the cost opportunity with it as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? You talk about that concept, and you think about outcomes. This has more to do when just the thing that we do, right? When we're at work, we're like, "Hey, I need a tool to do a job." Well, do you really need that tool? What is the outcome you're trying to get to? What is the best, cheapest, easiest way to get to that outcome? And if it requires software, that's good. But I remember one of my jobs, I got brought in as the defensive person to kind of help lead the defensive side, build their SOC, building their logging opportunity. And I get in there and he's like, "All right, I need you to buy a SIM." My boss is like, "Buy a SIM." I'm like, "Why do I need a SIM?" He goes, "Well, you're the defensive guy. I hired you, right? You need a SIM." I'm like, "I probably do, but I don't know that for sure." He goes, "What do you mean you don't need a SIM?" I'm like, "Well, I need a SIM means I have to solve a problem of I have a lot of logs in a lot of different areas and they're not homogeneous. So I need to have all that in a central location and I need that data normalized." I'm like, "I don't know that I have logs yet." He's like, "Huh?" I'm like, "Give me 30 days." And so in that 30 days, I went around, talked to the Unix team, the networking team, the Windows team, trying to figure out what logs are even available that I could have access to. And at the end of 30 days, I'm like, "Yeah, I do need a SIM, but I know why I need a SIM now," right? You just telling me I need a SIM without a clear understanding of what am I going to do when I get it wasn't very helpful. So that same idea that you just talked about, right, is hey, understand the outcome before you just start driving into it. Thank you
Mhm.
for that. All right.
Good
So
insight.
bash scripting, right? Here's the thing. I want to learn bash scripting. Might be something we actually have at level effect that people are going to do in their SOC 100, maybe in their other course, right? They're going to learn this thing. Cool. Well, could I use a cloud provider? Oh, sure. Probably a bit overkill, right? Because it's going to be a beefy box. I got to get it set up. It does cost a little bit of money. Might not be a lot, but let's look at it. I could do dedicated hardware at home. Would you really want to buy servers just to do this? Someone on here probably is going, "Yes, I still want to buy a server." And there's nothing I could do to talk you out of it. Do what you will. You could have dedicated other hardware at home, a different laptop or workstation, dual goal. But again, it's overkill. It's going to cost more money to do something. Virtualization software, again, very doable. I can run it, but still might be a little bit overkill. Daily driver, yeah, might not be possible. If you're running Windows, it might be totally possible. If you're running Linux, it's definitely possible. If you're running Mac, you may or may not want to try it there. But for me, WSL2 is the perfect fit for this because, hey, guess what? It's right there. It costs me no money. I get it set up and I get a great environment. I have all the resources I need. There's nothing I'm going to do scripting unless I go run that rm-rf space star command that someone told me to run, which I'm not going to do. Right. For the most part, I'm not going to do anything bad in there. And so it's okay for me to run it there because it met my learning needs. Right. And to this day, I still use WSL2 all the time because, hey, it's great there. Right. Half my brain is saying this. The other half's like, "I'm too lazy to physically try to build my own anyway." Yeah, easy options for life. Totally, Jordan, right? This is what we want to do. We want to just make it as easy for you as possible because at the end of the day, there's so many things to learn. You don't want to spend all your time getting an environment set up so you can learn, right? That's not the job that we want. At least not the job that I want.
That's right. Also got CI asking above, what is a daily driver? And you know what? That's a fair question
Yeah.
because
That,
like I remember when I first heard that too, I was like, what the hell is a daily driver? Why is everyone always talking about a daily driver?
you guys don't have chauffeurs? You don't
I
have someone
wish.
driving you around. That's your Uber person? No. So daily driver, sorry. So daily driver is what is my everyday day-to-day system, right? So my assumption is that most, if not everyone in here has a laptop or desktop that you use all the time. It doesn't matter if it's new, old, bad, decrepit. It's what you use day to day to send your emails, do maybe some schoolwork, write your documents, watch your, Netflix or whatever you want, right? But again, we use it for a lot of things. We don't want to screw it up. But sometimes, hey, it might have enough of what we need to help us learn and meet our objective without actually killing everything. So hopefully that answered your question there. All right, cool. So next thing I want to learn, let's see here. Let's see. I'm going to learn text file parsing, right? Cool. Well, I got these really large text files. Let's say they're 5 gig text files, and I want to learn how to extract data from them and start to find things, right? Because that might be for instant response. It might be what I do, just for learning how to do different things, right? So choice, cloud provider, Doable, right? But probably a little bit overkill, costs money. Dedicated hardware and home, whether it's server or laptop, again, doable, probably a little bit overkill. Virtualization software, again, doable, but probably overkill. Daily driver, maybe possible. Guess what? WSL to the for the win again, right? It's a perfect solution because, well, it's just a large text file. I've got space on my hard drive. I don't have to worry about that. I can use all the commands like sed, awk, grep, cut, whatever I want in there, not do any damage, and learn how to parse a file and extract data and do whatever I need without a problem, right? So here we're solved two things we've learned, and I have not installed virtualization software. I have not had to spend any extra money. I am just using what is available to me right now. So hopefully you're starting to see, right? We look at what we're trying to learn and we're trying to figure out, hey, where does this fit in, right? What is the best solution for me to use to kind of solve this problem? Packet analysis. This is something that we're doing, right? Got to look at packets. Love packets. Hey, if the packet says it didn't happen, guess what? It didn't happen. So I love that packets always tell the truth. The problem is sometimes extracting the data to understand what it sees as the truth can be a little bit tricky. So again, I could use a cloud provider. Doable, a little bit overkill, probably costs money. Same with dedicated hardware, right? For home, whether it's server or laptop. Again, I could do it. It's not impossible. And if I've already had it set up, maybe that's my go-to choice. But this is where I'm probably going to go to virtualization software, right? VMware, VirtualBox, whatever. Or I might use my daily driver, my everyday box here, but WSL2 will not work for this, right? So again, I could do things, but then we say, well, you know what? A cloud provider seems nice because I actually want to learn Suricata or I want to learn Snort and I want to do things. Well, the problem is some of the cloud providers, because of how they're built, it's all virtual. You're not getting a physical machine. They don't want you sniffing traffic going everything to that box, right? Because that would just be really bad if you saw everyone's traffic. So you don't always get to sniff everything there, right? They might only say, hey, you can sniff traffic to and from your box. So you can't necessarily install like an IDS there. However, if you really want to install an IDS, they're more than willing to let you for, guess what? A charge, right? So then you have to learn more configuration, get some crazy charge to do it. So again, I would not do that in a cloud provider, but anything on a VM, whether it's on your daily driver box, whether it's home hardware, is a great place to learn it. But again, what exactly are we trying to learn with packet analysis? Because sometimes me simply opening up a web browser and going to the internet or pinging something else on my network, doing, traceroute or something like that might be enough for me to learn what I need to learn. And I could just do that right from my daily driver, or I could do that with a basic VM and Linux, run TCP dump, capture it, look at it in Wireshark, things like that. So again, what exactly are we trying to learn will kind of help determine what we're doing. But if you notice, none of the stuff we needed to learn so far needed to be up 24/7, 365. None of it needed excessive amounts of hardware that requires us going and spending money that is just crazy and not eating and have to eat like top ramen and bologna and peanut butter jelly sandwiches or just eat bread and drink water because we're broke from buying all the hardware here. Windows logs. All right. I love Windows logs. I am a Windows logaholic. And hopefully, we get to talk more about that later. Probably not today, but if we're trying to learn about Windows event logging, right? Where would I want to learn that? Well, cloud provider, right? I built one really, really quick. You could go in there, you can turn on all the logs, no problem. And you may want to do that, right? And let's talk about the different options here because each one's going to pose a little bit different problem for us, right? So cloud provider is great because I get up quick, I get to go, I could do all my configuration. No problem. I only have one machine. But if I'm trying to do things via a GPO, right now the problem is I have to stand up two machines in the cloud. Then I have to configure Active Directory. I got to create the forest. I got to create the domain. I got to create the GPO. I got to get my server. Like it gets very complex very quickly. So it's like, all right, what exactly about Windows logs do I need to learn, right? Am I learning how to analyze the logs or am I learning how to configure them? And then that's a little bit different. Here's where you could probably use your dedicated hardware, right? Whether it's your server or your laptop. Again, it's doable, but it might be overkill. But virtualization software, this is a great place where you could just spin it up really quickly. Again, we don't need a high-end system here. I can look at logs this way and possibly your regular daily driver. The problem with this, right, is I could turn on excessive amounts of logging, and depending on what's going on, it could be a little bit of a performance hit to my box. Or if my daily driver is actually my work laptop, because that's kind of what I do every day, I could modify something I'm not supposed to use. So be cautious in what you're doing there. Right. But there are different options, but WSL2 in this instance will not work. But we have a lot of options, right, to run Windows logs. But again, we're going to have to turn on different settings, right? So we have to understand, are those settings going to have a negative impact or anything that I care about that I have to turn off later? And that can determine, am I going to use my everyday environment for this, or am I going to go use my, virtual machine for this? So one thing we haven't talked about is the idea of snapshots, right? Has anyone here used snapshots before? Yeah, you get to use infra as code, but you just started to get into the world of being a sysadmin, because now you have to start learning different technologies and how they do infrastructure as code. And then you have to learn about all the automation tools, and you start learning skills and tools, which are not bad, but you start deviating from your original learning path, right? If your learning path is just, hey, I want to learn about how does Active Directory GPO affect logs, what's not needed for that? Ansible. What's not needed for that? Packer. What's not needed for that? Terraform. There's a lot of things that are not needed for that. However, for you to start building all of that, guess what you're going to learn? All of those things and more, which is again why I love Ludus, because I could just say, hey, go ahead and build the servers for me. And someone's already got scripts to, make it join directories and stuff like that. So I can run their stuff and it just works. And I come back after a few hours to a fully built environment where, did it take hours? Yes. But guess what? It'd probably take me a lot longer doing everything manually. And during those hours, I got to go see the sunshine, see my cats, get a bite to eat, take a nap, work out, whatever. And I'm not just stuck there trying to get everything working. So, yeah, you can learn infrastructure as code, but it's like, do you really want to do that? And it's a question you have to kind of just ask yourself there. So yeah, there's different ways you can learn the Windows logging system here, right? So, again, a lot of nice things you could do to kind of get things up and running, to kind of make things easy for yourself here. So Active Directory, this is a little bit different because now I need probably a little bit beefier box. I may need to have 1, 2, 3 servers depending on what I'm doing here, right? But what I don't need is a gigantic environment, right? I don't need to say, hey, I need to go install 20 servers and I'm creating this gigantic force. I'm going to do no, you don't need to do all of that, right? Okay, what do I need to do? So cloud provider could absolutely do that, right? You saw how easy it was to get up and running. And actually, they make it even easier because you can build 3 servers at one time. So you build out your specs. And I can show you how to do that here real quick. We build it out. I say I need 3 of them instead of 1. Boom. It's built all 3 of them. I'm done. Then I just have to go to each one of them and start configuring them for what I need. Again, not bad, but how much time do I spend building my Active Directory environment versus learning the thing I wanted to out of the Active Directory environment? So just got to kind of think about that, right? So Karina, yeah, daily driver, your everyday machine, right? Whatever it is, whether it's your work machine, your home machine, your family machine, whatever you do for your pretty much everyday day-to-day work there. So you can do it in a cloud provider. It's just how much automation do you have to learn, or what do you do to kind of get things up and running? So again, am I working in my lab or am I working on my lab? Same thing goes for my dedicated home hardware. Now, the thing about this is once I get it set up, I can leave it up and running. That's not a problem. I'm not getting charged per minute, per hour, per second like I am the cloud provider. However, depending on how much horsepower this is taking, I am going to pay for it in electricity. I'm definitely going to pay for it in noise, and I might have, things heating up and then dealing with the whole AC thing. So you kind of got to figure, right? Is it worth that cost? And for me, virtualization software would be perfect for this, right? Because I only need to run 3 systems. Cool. They don't need to be big systems. They don't need to have dedicated stuff. So I can run VMware on my laptop. Now I do have 32 gigs of RAM in one laptop, 64 in another. So maybe I'm a little bit, I guess, just given a lot of hardware. I don't forget what the term for it, right? I just been blessed. I got great hardware there. So maybe I can do that. Maybe you only have 8, 16 gigs, whatever. Try it out. See, what does it do? Can you run it? Again, we don't need machines that are blazing fast. We're not having an Active Directory like 20,000 users. We're just starting to understand, right? What can I do with this environment? How does it work? What are the benefits? And again, Am I going to keep it up 24/7? Probably not. However, if it goes down, right, I do need to start things in a certain order so that things start talking to each other. Don't want to have any type of issue. So just ask yourself some questions before you kind of go through and um, building everything there. So here's one for you. I'm building a SIM or SIEM. I think we asked this before. Maybe you talked about it last week.
Yeah, last week in
Proper
the
way
chat.
to do it. I don't know. Did we ever come to a consensus on that?
We never did. I always go with Seam. To me, it looks like it should be Seam. I know a lot of people say Sim because I mean traditionally it was more of a Sim at first before it expanded over to a Seam itself. So I don't know. That's how I see it. Tomato,
Okay.
tomato.
Yeah. You know what you mean when you talk about it, though, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think
So,
so, at least.
all right. So in chat, tell me what, Bearded Ruckus. Come on, man. All right. What does SIM, whatever it is, what does the acronym actually stand for?
Yeah, come
Yeah.
on. Y'all should know
Come
this.
on.
We had a whole deep
People
dive
should
into
know
log
this.
analytics. Yeah. What does it mean? We
What
ran
does
through
the
elk
acronym
last
stand for? We
week.
use it all the time. Yes. All right. Security information and event management monitoring. Yep. Haven't heard the monitoring as much. Usually it's the security information and event uh, management of things.
Yeah.
But right, you knew it. Cool. All right. So I could use a cloud provider for this, right? Because I can definitely scale up my hardware there to do what I need to do. Uh, Definitely could use hardware at home, whether it's a server or a workstation. Because the thing about a SIM or any of these more back end piece of softwares, they are very power hungry. The thing about SIMs that are going to be extra power hungry that you just kind of need to think about is it's going to use a lot more CPU because it's parsing data as it's coming in, right? So as the data is coming in, it has to tear apart all that data. That takes CPU power. That means if it's chewing up CPU, other things on that box are not getting that CPU. So it's maybe, hey, this is why I need to think about where I put my SIM. It's not going to act like my normal Windows box who's just kind of hanging out doing nothing. But as it's generating logs, sending it to the SIM has a lot of stuff to do there. The other thing, there's a lot of IO, right? Input, output, because it is writing all that data to disk. And then every time it runs a rule, does a search, you run a dashboard or anything like that, right? It's doing a search, hitting that disk and now reading from it. So again, putting a tax on there, it isn't a heavy tax, but again, this is why a SIM is a little bit different because it's not just going to be a regular server that sits there, right? It does have other requirements, and we need to think about that. Then, of course, memory requirements, stuff like that. So usually it's going to be a little bit bigger, right? I could do virtualization software. I could, throw it on my laptop, 64 gigs of RAM, give it 16, 24 gigs of RAM. But unfortunately, right, it took up most of my laptop at that point to run. I could probably try and run it with 8 gigs, but man, 8 gigs, by the time you take out the operating system memory, by you take out the GUI part of it, by you start taking other things, I get very little memory for the actual SIM to be running. And so, right, don't want to use it. And WSL2 won't work. So what is the right answer here? In chat, tell me what is the right answer. Because if you notice, none of these said preferred. None of these said the right answer. So let's talk about what is the right answer and why. And this is going to get back to, do we want to work in our lab versus on our lab? It depends. Trying to be tricky there. That's not, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
So far, it depends is the only thing people want. Yep, it is something about, how much data and sysadmin you want to go through. And I think most of us are on the side of we don't want to be a sysadmin to our lab, right? We want to work on the lab, not in the lab. We want to learn something from our lab, not figure out how to keep our lab up and running. Yep, Docker local is great for small deployments. You could do certain things, but again, SIM is rarely a small deployment. And even if you do it like with 8 gigs of RAM, you might find that is not enough memory for the thing to work, again, with all the things that kind of have to go on in it. Plus, you still have to deal with, what do I do when I upgrade it, right? New version came out, whether it's a hot fix or new version came out that has some new functionality to use that I don't have access to. All these different things, right? We got to think about that. So, going to give a couple more seconds here. anyone have a better answer on where they think a SIM is going to be a great option? I'm going to cheat. None. SaaS provider. Right. Here's why we're going to get into it here. Does anyone know what a SaaS provider is? What does SaaS stand for? Right. It's one of the, we're finally got a four-letter term here instead of the usual threes. So it is software as a service, right? So software as a service means that I get to use the software. I don't manage the software, right? This is a key thing. If you ever had to work in a SIM and you ever had the unprivilege of having to manage SIM infrastructure, you will quickly realize managing SIM infrastructure is not for the faint at heart. It is not fun, and it is something that will drive you mad. So that is why I pick a SaaS provider, because guess what? They're going to update it. I'm not going to update it. They're going to manage it. I'm not going to manage it. I'm going to pay them a little bit of money, but guess what? I'm okay with the little bit I pay them for the benefits I receive on the other end, because when I look at how much I have to pay versus how much I did not have to do, to me, it was very worth it. So let's go into this here.
Yeah,
Any
local deployment. I was just gonna kind of share. We might even have someone in chat over here that wants to share some horror stories. But I mean, like even with us over here at Level Fact, we initially were trying to bootstrap and build everything ourselves. And then we eventually did move to a model where we were getting some things hosted. Just because of all the things that you're mentioning, it's okay at first, but as soon as you try to scale up at any degree, it becomes too cumbersome. Like
Yeah.
you go from tinkering to business, right? And there's a big jump from over there, and business means you're productive. It means you're valuable with your time. It means that the time you're putting into something has a return, as opposed to just messing around with it. You know?
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's the two opposite ends, right? There is no happy middle.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you got it set up and it didn't take you long. You're really happy. But like we said, when something breaks or you have to do an update or an upgrade, things go downhill very fast.
Yeah.
So that's why for me, this is great, right? So I'm using Elastic's thing. You don't have to, right? I pay by the hour here. Now, this is something that does stay up 24/7. It would be great if they didn't do that, but at the end of the day, I'm still okay with a little bit of cost I pay to bring all of my data in here. I don't manage any infrastructure, right? I immediately get updates in here. So last night when I was looking, right, I had to look. This one I got to go troubleshoot. It's got an upgrade. All these I upgraded last night with no problem. So I'm not spending forever in my environment doing anything. It's like, hey, I've got stuff in here. I'm just going to go start using the sim today. I'm going to start looking at, what's going on. Boom. Right. Very easy. I can see things that are triggering. So again, my life is much easier. I'm not managing it. And from a horsepower standpoint, it's got everything running, especially if you look at certain things that they have, right? So like this one also has machine learning available. This is extremely, extremely taxing to run in your environment because it is very CPU intensive and very memory intensive. So, hey, it's a part of my environment. Again, I don't have to configure it. I don't have to do anything. It's just here. I run it. And the way that they run it here, right? So let me go back here, go to my cloud. So I can create a normal deployment, right? So if I create a normal deployment, you kind of pick what you want. And in this case, we'll pick security, right? I get to pick, I'm not going to build it yet. I could pick, I'm going to pick AWS, I'll pick here. So we can see I'm at 44 cents an hour. If I was GCP, I'm at 47 cents an hour. So we'll cut some cost there. I'm in Ohio at 44 cents. Going to Virginia changed a little bit, but this is the hardware profile, right? So now I have to know a little bit more about how they're building things. If this was production, I would go to CPU optimize, but look, that just jumped my cost up to 62 cents an hour. For lab, I don't want that. And I could choose what version I want, right? So I'm going to say the latest here, but then I go to advanced settings. Now here's where it gets crazy, right? Oh, what do I do? And notice it can get very complex very quick when I start picking out all these things and get to a decent price. But at the end of the day, if I do this, it's still not bad. But because this stays up all the time, I know exactly what I'm going to get. What I chose to do with them is this new thing called Serverless. Has anyone heard of this term before, serverless? So here we're talking about physical servers, right? You saw I had to go configure things. It's actually building things. Serverless is the idea that all that back end technical stuff, that is something for the vendor to manage, not me. So all I do is I create something, what I want, you give it a name, you pick where it is, and that is the end of it. There is no picking hardware profiles, there is no picking anything else. And the nice thing about this is it makes it much easier to deal with in terms of cost because it only costs what I use, right? So we're back to that. Instead of having a set amount of how much I'm using, it's more, well, how many endpoints do you have versus how much data you have? The kind of combination of it all is going to come up with a cost. So I can look here, I can see how much data I've been going in. I can see my data storage here. One thing I did do to help minimize my costs is I did change my storage retention to only 7 days because I don't need a lot of data in there, right? I don't need 30 days worth of data. I don't need a lot. I just keep a little bit in there so I could play around and learn. And this also helps minimize my costs, right? And then again, I can look at this and go, hey, if I have a lot of data coming in, let me drop that down even more to where, again, I'm thinking more about the cost of it. But as far as the use of it, right, I don't want to sit there and have to muck with the environment and keep things up and running myself. Just something I don't want to do. So again, I could be in here and now I can use the product. I'm not going in and learning how to manage SIM infrastructure. I'm in the SIM UI doing all the SIM things that I want to do. Any questions on that? All right, so we're going to come by here. We're going to go back to our instances over here in AWS, right? So this is the neat little trick. I'm going to launch an instance. Again, I'm doing level effect. I'm going to build my Windows boxes here. I'm going to pick my operating system. I'm going to pick my hardware type. T3 medium. Boom. I'm going to pick my login pair that I've already got there. Now, everything is set to go, right? Let's change this. Now, here's the thing. Over here on the top right, number of instances 1. If I change that to 3, it will launch 3 servers for me, right? So I don't have to go build these 3 individually and go through that screen all the time, each one, over and over and over. It's right there for me. So boom, all 3 are already built and running. Now you notice that the names are a little bit different here. So let me change this to DC for domain controller. We'll do this for MS for member server. And we'll do this for WS for workstation, right? So now I know the role of each server. I've got my domain controller. I've got my member server. I've got my workstation. Even though they're running the exact same operating system, it doesn't really matter, right? It's more about how do I intend to use it. So I don't need to have different operating systems. I don't need to have client operating systems because I'm not going to run like Word on it or anything like that, right? I'm just testing it out for connectivity. I'm seeing, how does it look when I RDP? What do the logs look like? Things like that. And then from here, right, we'll go into each one. We'll go to connect. We'll have to go get our credentials for each one and save it. But again, very easy to manage. And when I'm done using all of them, right, what I could do is I could pick all of them. And now I would just stop them all. I'm going to wait a little bit because they're still being built out there. Once they're all built, I will stop them. Right. So I'm waiting for this to get done. When I stop them is when I stop getting charged. Now I still will pay a little bit of money for the disk drive that is currently locked up, right? Because they are taking up space with the operating system and whatever else I've installed. So you do pay a small price for that, but it's definitely not a heavy premium or anything that's going to break the budget. But leaving it on could definitely do that. So we don't want to do that. So we're just refreshing. We're waiting for it to finally initialize. And when it's done, we'll show you how to stop them and again, terminate them. So if you're not using them, it's very easy to stop. We'll show you how to stop them, show you how to start them again really quick. And to me, it's just worth doing that than going through and having to, you know, leave them on forever, building an environment where they stay 24/7. So, then any questions while we're waiting for this? So, two of them are fully built there, waiting for that last one. I was hoping people were a little bit more talkative today. Maybe it's Friday.
I think it's Friday. They're also taking a lot of this in as well, too. Kind of,
Hopefully, I didn't fry any brains. Try to keep it fairly engaging, fairly, I guess,
yeah,
intro level, just giving things to think about, things to think about.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone's got any questions, please go ahead and drop it over here. Yeah, Green is taking it in as well too. Practical advice. Yeah, I think a lot of them are just sort of like consuming the knowledge right now, from what I can see in the comments, at least.
Yeah.
But go ahead, drop things over here, and you'll be happy to answer them as he goes.
Yeah. More than happy to chat about this kind of stuff. Right. That's kind of what we're here for. Right. At the end of the day, yes, I am technically the person talking and all that, but at the end of the day, it is for you, the listeners, for the students, especially. There's things you want to learn. There's things you want to know. You're trying to get advice, trying to figure out where to go. That's what we're here for, right? To kind of help you in your journey and what you're learning. All right. So now all three are checked, right? I'm like, cool, cool. Right. So I come here now. I could do it one by one by one, or I cheat. I just do all of them instant state. Right? I don't want to terminate them. Um, ah, I don't need that one there. I'm going to go ahead and stop instance. Boom. Now it's going to go ahead and stop them. Right. Really quick. Boom. Look how fast it turned those off. Right. Really easy, really fast. I'm not spending any money on them. It says stopping. I need to wait for it to be stopped before I do anything else. But essentially, right, that didn't cost me a ton of money. I've built now 4 VMs. I built that one VM and deleted it. You can see level effect. I built these other 3 I want to say VMs, but kind of VMs very quickly. And my cost of this is not even going to be $1 to do all of this. Again, I'm not running everything. And then once they're all at the stop state, right, we're waiting for these 2 here to get there. We'll turn them all back on just so you can see how easy it is. But yeah, I've left a lot of room in here for people to kind of ask questions and be more interactive. So please ask questions because we still have roughly half an hour left. All right. So they're all at a stop state, right? So again, I can come in here, click on them, instant state, start instances. Boom, it's starting them up.
A question over there from
Hey, wow.
Blueberry Frank, actually.
All right. What's one piece of advice you wish you received before starting your home lab? I wish someone had this presentation for me. I wish I did not look at my friend's lab, get jealous, and build this monstrosity that's sitting right there. That is honestly what I wish. At the same time, cloud, because this was like early 2015, cloud was there, but it wasn't, I guess, as widely adopted. So I didn't know my other options. WSL2 didn't exist yet. VMware was a paid for thing. So, you had to go buy that. So again, over time, things have changed to make things a little bit easier. So where we are today, right, things are definitely changed. We want to look at, okay, based on the state of technology today, things are more open. We have more options. Let's look at all of that to figure out what is the best way for you to learn. Don't do what I did, a decade ago to learn. So for me, it's like, yeah, I've got this stuff. So it wouldn't be wise for me to not use what I have. So I am going to use it, but I have to still think, you know what? This is expensive stuff to run because of electricity and heat and all that. So funny enough, I'll probably be moving to a new house here shortly in the next, month or two. I'm actually putting it in the basement because I don't want it in my office anymore. I don't want the noise. I don't want the heat. It'll be cool enough in the basement that if it heats up the basement, cool. I don't really care. So I'm going to try and minimize some of the cost because I can't get away from the power, but I don't have to fight with it. So that's kind of the best thing for you there, Frankie. Is just, and I wish someone would have told me this before, and I didn't get sucked into the trap that I see a lot of other people do, which is seeing what other people have built and kind of trying to build there. All right. Karina saying, Neil, you're saying how building a virtual home lab on your daily driver or your regular day-to-day machine is risky because if something goes wrong, it affects your everyday machine. How about building a virtual home lab on the cloud and accessing it from your daily driver? Is that risky as well or not so much? So that is not risky, right? Because all the things we're doing that could be risky are actually in the cloud environment. The only thing we have in our environment is an RDB client, right? Whether it's Microsoft RDP, they have two different versions of it, or MOBA X Terminal, whatever your RDB client is, you're connecting remotely to it, right? So the great thing is whatever you blow up is only on the cloud provider side, not on your side. So the chances of you blowing up something on your side, you'd really have to go out of your way to use some really malicious software that does something. And even then, I think you're going to have a hard time doing it. So, yeah, using a cloud provider is great for something like that, right? Or even if you use a virtual machine, right? You install VMware on your box and you make a 2 gig machine or a 4 gig machine to do stuff, right? The great thing is this thing called Snapshots, right? And I forgot to talk about this. So Snapshots is a great way to save you time, energy, money, and frustration. So you build your operating system, everything looks good. Before you do the thing you want to learn, you click take snapshot. And what it does is it takes a snapshot of memory of the disk and pretty much says, hey, at this moment in time, this is what this computer or VM looks like. So then it takes a snapshot, you label it, whatever. Then you go on doing whatever you're working. Say you're working directly with the registry and you do a typo, you do something bad, and all of a sudden it blue screens and you can't go back to it, right? Well, before snapshots, here's what you would do. You would go reinstall everything all over again, delete that VM, start all over from scratch. And that could take, hours to do and it's frustrating and all that. The good thing is what I found in life generally, the more painful the problem you have and the more pain you go through solving it, the less chances you are of making that exact same problem later in life. But let's see if we can stop doing that in the first place. So with that same scenario, if I saved a snapshot, do my registry edit, blue screens, all I do is say, hey, restore to last snapshot. And it goes and it reverts everything back to the last known working order. And you can take multiple snapshots, right? So I could take a snapshot before my registry edit, do my registry edit, take another snapshot after, right? And I can do that ad nauseum, right? Pretty much forever and ever. I won't say forever and ever. There's probably a limit somewhere, but you can take a lot of snapshots every time you make a choice and say, hey, I want to revert back to a specific. So you don't have to revert just to the last snapshot. You can revert 2 or 3 snapshots before, depending on what you're doing. So saving snapshots definitely is a time saver. You don't get that in a cloud environment, right? In a cloud environment, it's pretty much, hey, here's the thing. Yeah, you blow it up, you just get to start all over again. The difference is they do make some of it a little bit easier in the fact that at least getting the operating system basically up and running, they take away all that pain from you or for you in kind of doing that. Hopefully that answered your question, Karina. Other questions? We still got like 20 minutes, people.
I think a lot of the students as well too. This is the first intro, I believe, at least half of the crew here, from names I'm seeing inside of chat, that they've seen this. So this is like brand spanking new
Brand new.
content of like, whoa, this is what cloud infrastructure actually looks like.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't know. I would go out on a limb and say I don't think a lot of them might have realized it's just like it's a lot of clicking and choosing options and a lot of understanding of terms and definitions.
Yeah.
That's all what it is.
It is, right? So here they're all up and running, and now I'm just gonna terminate them all. Boom. Now they're all terminated. Right. So it's very easy. Now, if you want, right, if you're like, oh man, I want to automate things, they do have APIs, they do have CLIs. There are ways to automate the building of all of your stuff in cloud. That's one of the benefits. But for what we're doing, to me, automations is probably a little bit overkill just because, hey, why do all of that? But let's look at this real quick.
Yeah, Jordan's even saying in chat. So it's the first time outside of it, but this is the first time like actually seeing it as well too. So makes sense. Blueberry's got a question though as well, and Karina's typing up another one in the meantime.
All right. When to expand your home lab versus simplifying it. So pretty much it's what do I need to do, right? If at the end of the day, I need new hardware. It's okay to expand it. But again, do I really need it? Do I need it for a moment in time? Do I need it forever? Right? Have I really run through everything I can possibly do in this home lab? And I know that I maxed it out and there's nothing else I can do. Excuse me. What is my next option? So, probably haven't gone over this in the stuff, but in the other part of the world, right? Technology, someone mentioned Docker. In large environments, people are using Docker all over the place and they're managing it with uh, I guess, a product utility. I don't know what we want to call it, software. Kubernetes, right? It's another piece of infrastructure, came from Google. So someone might say, hey, I want to manage a large piece of infrastructure with that, but a VM might be too big for me. So that's where those Raspberry Pi things might come in handy, right? But you're paying a lot of money for very little use because outside of that, you might not have other uses for that Raspberry Pi lab unless it just looks really cool. So a lot of it's just saying, hey, what do I need to do? For the most part, I found that right now my HP Z620 that is 12 years old, um, thanks to Ludus, it is back up and running. And I use that for just about everything that I do today. I've not turned my Dells on in a while. I need to. I need to get Ludus on them and do some stuff. But you could do so much with so little, right? I think a lot of times when we think about building a lab, we have in our mind, I'm going to build this crazy lab. Like you don't need a crazy lab to learn that unless you have a very specific reason to do it. So it's like, hey, let me just build exactly what I need to do what I want there. So hopefully that answered your question there, Blueberry. Let's see. All right, Bearded Ruckus. First reaction when using cloud, overwhelmed, but after using it gets easier. That is true. All right, Karina, been wondering if you have a virtual lab on the cloud and then wanted to move that lab to a local dedicated home machine, how would you do that? Snapshots or some other way? Great question. So that would be automation, right? Because unfortunately, there's no easy way to move your configuration, your data, your settings, and all that you've done from the cloud to your home lab. And so this is where, if you've automated it, use something like Ansible, right, that help build your environment. The great thing is with a lot of these automations, all you have to do is change and point it to a different environment, whether it's a different cloud provider, whether it's your home lab, whether it's a local VM, and the automation will still work, right? Because it understands how do I do that automation just with different syntax because of where I'm going to be doing it. But there is no way to really move your infrastructure from home to cloud or vice versa from the cloud to home. So wherever you build it, you're kind of there. But again, usually, right, when I'm building a lab, it's for a very specific purpose. So I don't think I've had a lab stay up so long that I even had to think about moving it somewhere else. So it's more about, okay, what am I doing in this lab? And then what am I going to pretty much tear it down and destroy it? So hopefully it answers your question. So here's one of the great things about Ludus, right? Is these environment things, they've already got it built. You want a basic Active Directory? They build this out of the box. They got the configurations that tell you how to build it. You want Elastic Security built in there. Remember, now this is going to be a little bit more power hungry, but they tell you, here's the configuration you need to build it. If you want to do a so this is game of Active Directory. While this is more of a red team environment because it is specifically misconfigured so that people can go attacks, here's what it builds. 3 domain controllers, 2 servers. You get 5 total systems. It builds user accounts for you. It builds misconfigurations for you. Now, like, well, what do I need that for? Well, you may not need that necessarily for the attack standpoint, but you know what you can do with that? That is exactly what I have running. I have this Game of Thrones Labs environment running, and that is giving me all of my alerts and everything that is in this environment right here, right? All of my data coming in. Boom. So you can see, right? I'm getting a decent amount of data coming in over here. So it gives me enough to kind of sift through around to play with. So I'm not doing it like a red teamer would. I'm just using their infrastructure to get the data that I want. But again, it just makes it so nice because you can build stuff here automatically with that, right? You can build this environment over here. It's a little bit smaller. You can build their Ninja Hacking Academy where they don't even tell you what it is. You got to figure it out. So there's a lot of options here, right? And again, this is a way to where you can very easily build something and not have to spend your time building something because they've done a lot of the automation for you. Yeah, definitely go ahead and throw this Ludus link into the resource. I think it's a great thing to do. So I did used to work for Elastic. Worked there for 6 years. Um, Left there in early April, and I just started working at Graylog the end of last year. But I still like the Elastic software. I think they do some amazing stuff there. I like their fact that their basic license, which is free for use, you just can't turn around and sell it, or you can't sell services on top of it, has a lot of functionality in there, and so you can understand a SIM, EDR. You can understand a lot of things for no money because of what they give you with that basic license, right? If you want, you can get a different license if you're using their cloud environment, right? And based on that, your charge will be different, but you also get to access with different things to kind of play around with more functionality. The only thing is with a lot of these SaaS providers is you can't constantly change your license from like, a basic license to an enterprise or an all out license. Usually it's like, maybe once a month you could change it out. So, but that's a minor limitation when you come to think about it to, be able to test it out and see, hey, what does it look like and kind of learn from there. All right, so hopefully that answers some of your questions. Karina is like also wondering if you want to have a virtual home lab in the cloud and want to access it on your daily driver, what's a good amount of RAM if it matters? So two real good things she asked about here, right? Is it best to have Windows OS and an Intel chip on that daily driver? So for me personally, I'm a Windows person. I find that I have a lot more access to do things. What you'll find is, I don't know who's a big Mac person here, but do you know when they came out with the new M series chips, like the M1 chip? I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think we've got quite a few Mac users. What was that, like 2020 or 2019 or so, when they moved from Intel over to the M series? I think it was around then.
Yeah. And so one of the things is, right, when we talk about chipsets, AMD and Intel, while they're two
2020.
physically different manufacturers of chips, they all follow the Intel instruction set, and it's an Intel based chipset. When you look at the M1 or the M2, that is a totally different chipset. That is an ARM chipset. So the problem is, because of that, it doesn't run VMs very well, because if the operating system doesn't understand ARM, you're limited as what you can use, right? So right now, Mac understands ARM, so you can do that. There's a couple of Windows operating systems that understand ARM that you could use. There's a couple of Linux distributions that have an ARM variant that you could use, but you'll find your software is going to be significantly more limited on an ARM chipset because most of the world doesn't use that. Also, when you get to the cloud environment, you go over here, there are different things here, right? So if I go to my dashboard and it says, hey, check out this thing, it's a better price. I'm like, oh, cool. Let me see, what can I do? Because, hey, I love to save money. Well, their Graviton 2s are not Intel chips. These are ARM chips specifically built by AWS for AWS. So I don't get to save the money for my Windows boxes because they won't work here. So for the most part, I am using Intel chips for everything I do. I rarely go to ARM unless there's a very specific reason why I need it. So I'm a Windows person, an Intel chip for my daily driver. And then anytime I'm building something in the cloud, it's going to be Intel chip and most likely Windows, because the times I need Linux are very far and few between. So either I'm going to use WSL2 on my regular daily driver. I might use a VM, but I could build something in the cloud for that. It really depends. Usually I look at the minimum hardware specs for the operating system and then kind of figure out, is that going to work enough for me? So I figured out that 4 gigs of RAM is usually good for Windows, because out of the box, it's going to use between 2 and 3 gigs of RAM without doing anything else. So I like to have a little bit better experience. So personally, I just move it up just a little bit. But even then, right, when I did that, we'll look at again here. We go through, we pick Windows, we'll pick this, right? So here, it's 1 cent and just about 2 cents an hour. But again, it's just not worth it for me. So I do a medium. If I can spell, medium gives me 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory, and it comes in at a whopping 6 cents an hour, right? And so to me, that's fairly cheap. And then I could, use how many instances I want and build them all at one time, however I want to do that. And again, just turn them off when you're not using it. So this is probably the biggest I go. Now, if I'm building a domain controller, something that needs a little bit more horsepower, I might bump up the memory on that one specific instance. But again, play around and you'll kind of get a feel for what you like. You talk to other people. I'm on the Discord there. You can always ask more questions there to specific stuff, but kind of, that's how I gauge things is 2 gigs, 4 gigs of memory and 2 CPUs is like my general starting point. Great questions. So we're almost out of time here. Anyone else here? Do employers typically want to see documentation of home lab setup? If so, any quick recommendations for documenting a home lab setup for future reference or job interview? So that is a tricky question because I don't know what all employers do. I know when I interviewed here at Greylock, they're like, "Hey, do you have a home lab?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I went into my spiel because I was so excited. I get to talk about my home lab. So I went into all this, and the recruiter's eyes went and glossed over. He just wanted to know, Neil, do you have a home lab? He didn't know what all I had. He could really care less. He's like, do you have a home lab? So I think a lot of it just comes down to right the job and interview. I don't think having a network diagram is bad or having someone to visually show what your home lab looks like, right? Simply showing a picture of, hey, check out my servers and check out my hard drives and my network equipment really tells the story, right? You want to be able to say, hey, kind of like with Ludus, right? It's, hey, what does it look like? Right? Something simple like, hey, this is what my lab looks like. This is what I built. This is what I'm learning for in there, right? These are very basic things to do. And again, this is going to change over time. So for me, it's never been really about, hey, this is what my lab looked like, but hey, this is what I built in my home lab, and this is what I learned when I built it. Telling someone I built Active Directory, all right, cool. But am I interviewing for an Active Directory job? No, I haven't done that in decades now. Man, I'm old. But if I say, hey, I built an Active Directory environment so I could learn about how GPOs affect the policies and how they affect logging, and then I created different OUs to check that out, and then here's the result of that. Now I'm saying, oh, here's why Neil built it, right? He built it to learn about logs, but at the end, it was more about what did the logs look like in his SIM, and his SIM of choice happened to be Elastic, and whatever. Cool. Well, that's how things work. And you tell people what you built, but more importantly, what was the end state of what are you trying to learn from there?
Yeah. Going back to that outcome objective, what was
Yeah.
the result, right? Like doesn't matter that you knew what's on several ports and the version and what the request looks like at such like a granular data level. That's such like a level of minutia that's not really relevant. So yeah, I'm glad you're hitting really hard on that point
Yeah.
over
Like
there, Neil, through the
I don't like
presentation.
those type of interviews like, hey, what port
No,
is
no one
25
does. Yeah, no
or
one
what's
likes
SMTP or
those.
SSH? It's like, dude, I could Google that, right? But you go, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I know that by default, this log is not turned on in Windows. And this is the command you do to turn it on. And
yeah,
those things start to tell people, oh, I know about how to turn how to configure things, what things
yeah.
I need to think about. And some of this we're going to go
Use
more over later
cases.
on in like the SIM course and the home lab course.
Yeah,
And some of the SIM engineering stuff I want to do later here.
cool.
Oh, cool. That's
Really
all
good
I got.
questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
really,
good
really good
question.
questions here in the chat. I'm glad everyone started to pipe up.
Yeah.
It's not as scary, is it? Right? I think now that a lot of you have actually seen what it's like, it's on the back end. Please tell me, like, it's not as complex or convoluted or scary as it used to be. Because this was a lot of really good information just laid out in a digestible manner. From what I've been able to observe over here and seeing the comments get more and more interested into the content. But what do y'all think?
Yeah. Yay, nay, like it, fire Neil. Come on. What are we saying? It's pretty bad when they fire the volunteer, right? Like send the guy home. Um, yeah, hopefully this was helpful to people, right? Just understanding cloud is just a different option. It's neither good nor bad nor scary.
Mm,
You can manage the cost, but it is a way to say, hey, if I don't have money, right? If I'm going to buy a lab, if I start out, I'm going to spend anywhere between $500 and $1,000 just to start my lab. So how many hours do I get at 6 cents an hour for that? Right? Think of it that way. Yeah, you could buy a lot, but that was one machine. You could do some stuff with it, right? So if I look at that tricked out machine that Eric built that ran the 92 VMs, he probably spent between 1,000 and 1,500 by the time he bought the box, bought the VMEs, bought the amount of memory, the heat sinks, the cooling, all that kind of stuff. Is a pretty penny. Cool. How many hours do I get to run at 6 cents an hour for that? All All right. Well,
Yeah.
glad you got some help out of it, Karina. There, home labs and hardware definitely add a knowledge, and a lot of it is. I think a lot of people have been in it longer. We kind of grew up having to build hardware ourselves, right? We built our first PCs. We're more used to it just because when I started in information security, January 2000, we literally would rack and stack our own hardware before we got to use it, right? So it came off the dock on a crash cart. A crash cart is nothing more than kind of like a cart where you could put your server, had a keyboard, mouse, and monitor on it. We'd roll it into the data center. We'd put the rail kit together, right? And so the rail kit part of it goes on the server, the other part goes in the rack mount. Then you get a friend because they were super heavy. You lift up either side of the server, you
Yeah.
align it without trying to crush your fingers or choke yourself because you're wearing a tie. You slide it into your rack, then you go around to the back, you plug in the power, you plug in the network cables. Oh, guess what? We didn't have network cables ready yet because we had to measure it. We cut our own network cables. We crimped our own network cables. Then we go to the switch. There was just a lot of work that we did early on to where we got that level of experience. So for us, people have been doing it for a while. It's not as scary just because we've had to do more. We've had more things to deal with before we even got used to, a usable state.
Yeah, you were giving me some memories over there with the tie.
Oh yeah.
I,
I worked at
definitely
financials and you had to wear ties.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was only the past what is it, 2025 now, right? But I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was around 2018-ish to 2019 when we started to see a bit of like a relaxing on IT
Yeah.
sysadmins, and they didn't have to be as dressed up
Yeah.
in a lot of organizations. But yeah, up until then, I remember even in the hotel side of things, early 2000s, you'd see like the IT guys in a full suit, you
Yeah.
know, like
You're
in
like,
a
what's
full
going on?
suit because like at some point they might be customer facing, right? So like yeah, they'd be in a
Yeah.
full suit and tie and then racking servers as well too, and you can see
Yeah.
they're like dying. The times
Yeah.
have changed for the
Yeah,
better
like,
for
I
sure.
like to wear suits, right? It's definitely something, but I don't do that to build my lab.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna be customer facing, if I'm going out in public, then yeah, you're gonna see me dress up and, dress up to the nines and all that. But again, I'm not racking and stacking stuff. I'm not building anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot more to it, right? So after you
Yeah.
racked and stacked it, then you go around, you install the CD, you get to install the operating system manually. Automation isn't there yet. After you install the operating system, then you get through and lock down the operating system. After you lock down the operating system, then you got to install, for example, the firewall software. After you do that, then you get to do the same thing and build a firewall manager. Then you get to connect the two. Then you get to start configuring actual firewall rules.
Hmm.
That's a lot more work.
We definitely have a lot more convenience and luxury today.
Yeah.
But cool. Well, look, we got a couple more minutes over here. Any last burning questions for Neil over here that you want to cover? I You can see IT wasn't as glamorized. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
It wasn't for the faint of heart. But
Yeah.
you know, it is what it is.
So Matt's going to be looking into Ludus more after work. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Much
Ludus is
easier ways to do
amazing.
it.
I mean, as long as you have a machine you can dedicate to it, it is amazing to run. Let's
Karina
see here.
got
Like
some
here's my
knowledge out of
lab,
this.
here's
Yeah.
my Go lab running, right? It has a router. The other nice thing about Ludus, I'll talk about real quick, is it builds a network environment where the only way to get to this is actually to use a VPN, right? So you use WireGuard. Even if you're at home, you have to use WireGuard VPN to get access to it. So it keeps everything in a place where if things blow up, they can't blow up too bad. And you can actually set it so your lab does not have internet access. By default, it does. So mine do. But if you're really worried about something, right, you're dealing with malware, or you just don't trust yourself, you can put a template and say, hey, for a moment in time, turn off internet access for my entire lab. I'm going to VPN in, I'm going to do whatever, right? So the only access is through my machine. But when I want, I can change the configuration, then give them internet access back because I'm cool with what it's doing, right? So there's just a lot of neat things that it does. But at the end of the day, right, it's just running Proxmox for you, but it's even made the automation of Proxmox so much nicer.
Yeah. Last question over here for Bearded Ruckus. So, are you going through any learning curves in your current role?
Oh, that's a hard one because my role is very wild. But I definitely have had learning curves in the last few years just because for a while technology was changing, it wasn't nearly as much in the infrastructure side, right? It was more on like the programming languages and stuff like that. But then when DevOps came out and all of a sudden you have automation for building things that you never had before in Kubernetes. All of that changed things I have to learn more from a security standpoint because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my thought is when a technology comes out, attackers look at what technology is being adopted by developers the fastest, and then that's what they learn because they realize security is nowhere near following that same path. Right. So once they do, then they know what to attack. So for me, it was learning these technologies so that I could get better at learning how to secure them, how to monitor them, how to harden them, all those different things. So yeah, learning curves is definitely, I've gotten away from where I used to read an entire book on a subject to where, hey, I need to go do really good Google searching to find the answer I need. And I read just a little bit around that, but I don't spend my time learning anything super well. Very rarely do I have to learn something super in depth just because having to learn everything is so hard.
Yep.
Hopefully that answered your question, but we can have more of a chat about it later on the Discord channel.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming up to close over here. So, all right. Ton of information. Super packed stream. I definitely expect students to be rewatching the recording of this. So the recording should be up on Monday. And Neil, I just want to say thank you very much for coming on stream, putting this together. I can see you put a lot of work into it. Really good glimpse under the hood of seeing how this actually all works. A lot of good insight. All of the pain and trials and tribulations you went through sharing with the students, I think that's super valuable. They're definitely going to appreciate this for a while. Even when they actually start getting more to building their home lab content, they're going to be reviewing this video. I'm certain of that. So thank you. And thank you everyone in chat as well for the engagement, the support, the comments, and for being here, making some time on your Friday.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Any last comments you want to share over there, Neil?
No, thank you everyone for it. And again, I'm on the Discord. You can find me under my name there, Apu, and be more than happy to chat with people and kind of help you out on your journey, whether you're building your lab now, tomorrow, next year. If I'm on there, just at me and we'll chat about things.
Awesome. Cool. Looks like your wallet's
yeah.
Bearded appreciates you, for helping make some good decisions. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you again, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow for SOC 100 and over through the weekend with cyber threat intelligence and report writing on Sunday. Stay connected with Neil. He's going to be around in our Discord, and this recording will again go up on Monday. And of course, make sure that you are following him on his socials over there to keep up with what he's doing. I know he's packing up a lot of good content, and he's going to be preparing the home lab content for you in SOC 100 coming up soon for when we go from the first portion that we built. We're going to be now building the next portion with your own home lab SIEM setup with everything you need to start doing some more malware analysis at home. So look forward to that as well too. Cool. Thanks again, everyone.
Right,
Have a good Friday. We'll see you tomorrow.
See y'all.